Welcome to Alasquatch, the show all about Bigfoot in the great state of Alaska. I'm your host, Beans Baxter. So lace up your boots, zip up your coat, and come with me on an adventure as we explore all things cryptid in the last frontier. Hey guys, what's going on? I am back from vacation. We've got some sunny weather going on out here out my window, which is kind of a surprise because the last few days it's been really cloudy and raining a lot. You'll have to excuse me, I'm a little hoarse. I'm not sure if it's from traveling, if I picked up a bug, or if it's just from uh, sleeping with my mouth open. I don't know. Um, probably caught something while I was out traveling because that's usually how it goes. Being around people on planes and stuff, you know how it goes. You're always getting some kind of bug or something when you get back home. I'm thankful I didn't get it during vacation and I waited to get it till I got home. This is the last episode of my overview of True Detective season 4, Night Country. The season set in Alaska. Uh, like I said, normally I've kind of cut reviews and stuff out of my repertoire for the channel, but I feel because this one is Alaska centric and it's kind of I guess paranormal related, and because I've had experience in law enforcement in Alaska and I can offer some particular insight into the show, I figured I'd go ahead and throw this together. This is going to be over the last 3 episodes. Two of them dropped while I was on vacation, and then the last one just dropped the other day. And we watched it the day it dropped. And I'm not going to get. I'll get into it. Like this is going to be a pretty long episode. I took notes on all the episodes. I'm going to try and get through the 4th and 5th episode pretty quick so we can spend more time on the finale. Episode 4, it opens up on Christmas Eve. Danvers is watching the video they found of Annie. I remembered her name. I wrote it down. Of Annie getting. We assume it's the when she gets murdered. The video she takes in the ice cave. She's watching it in bed. She's looking at it. She's trying to figure some stuff out, looking at details and such, and she ends up running into Navarro's sister, who's running around like taking her clothes off and obviously having some kind of mental health episode. She's worried that the captain guy Conley is taking the case, which again is kind of funny because during my time in law enforcement, it was very seldom when officers would get upset that another agency wanted a case. Usually it was quite the opposite. It's like, oh, you should take this. And it's not necessarily because they were lazy or anything. It's because most cops in Alaska have a pretty full plate as far as caseload. And anytime you can get kind of like some assistance or reprieve with that, it's usually appreciated. And there are usually some like some legit jurisdictional issues where it's like, well, this is probably troopers. It's amazing to me how it's not really anything that I considered until I became a police officer. But the majority of people, normal, everyday, like law abiding people, the majority of people have no idea who's responsible for their police service. And I worked for a municipality police, kind of like in this police department. And it would amaze me if I had a nickel for every time someone came in to report something and they actually lived in Alaska State Trooper jurisdiction and it was actually a trooper. If I had a nickel for that, I could have retired years earlier. Like I would have been able to retire at like 40 years old. It was crazy. But the reality of it is, most people don't have to deal or interact with the police on a normal everyday basis. It's not really something they think about. And then when something comes up, it's like, well, I live, even though their address may say Homer, they don't live in the corporate city limits. And the troopers actually provided services to them, and they had no idea. So they would just come in and be like, I need to report something. And the first thing we always ask is, where do you live? And even if they say Homer, we would say, what's your address? Like, what street do you live on? Because you could technically still have a Homer address and live in trooper jurisdiction. And a lot of people would be like, well, what does it matter? Crime's a crime. You should do your job and do the. Well, it matters because of insurance stuff and jurisdictional stuff. And, if I go off and start fighting crime outside the city limits and something happens to me, it could affect the way, if I get hurt or something like that, it could affect the way that insurance handles that. They could be like, well, he wasn't in his own jurisdiction. He wasn't taking care of, his city. So why should we pay his medical bills? And believe it or not, that kind of stuff happens. Now, if it's a different ball game, like if the troopers call and say, "Hey, we need help doing this. Can you help come and assist us?" It becomes a different thing then, because you're still acting within the scope of your duties, but you're responding to a call for assistance. But if you just on your own, like, initiate activity outside the city limits, while you still might technically have jurisdiction and have arrest powers and be able to handle the situation, it can get tricky when it comes to like insurance and coverage and stuff like that. So technically, you don't really want to handle things outside of the city limits unless you're assisting the agency that's responsible for that jurisdiction. Um, and we're getting way doesn't really have anything to do with True Detective, but uh, just this worry that Danvers has that somebody they're trying to take the case away from her, and like I said, it's very rare that that happens. Usually, it's quite the opposite. It's like, please take this case, take this headache away from me. Um, so younger Pryor tells Danvers about a similar case, tells her about this heist guy that got found several years ago with similar injuries to the scientist, but he survived. Danvers tells him to put out an APB. APBs are not a thing. The correct nomenclature is BOLO, be on the lookout. It's been that way ever since I was a cop. I don't think I've ever had a APB issued under my watch, or have received one. I think it's almost pretty much universal that there are BOLOs now. There may be some municipal department somewhere in the lower 48 that still uses that term, but it's funny because I give the show so many props with a lot of their uh, handling of props of like the way they actually had the crime lab logo on the manual. They got the state trooper license plates right, stuff like that. But then the writing, something will come up in the writing, and they'll use like the wrong nomenclature, or they'll say something wrong about it, and it just irritates me. I'm sure if you've ever like watched enough TV or movies with a military or law enforcement guy, and then you never really hear that. That's not how it works. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on as to why I think a lot of us get so frustrated with that kind of stuff. Um, we jump to the Hank Pryor, the older Pryor, getting stood up. His uh, wife, or not, I guess they're not married yet. His girlfriend, his long distance girlfriend, that he probably met on the internet, is supposed to be coming in. Obviously, she doesn't get off the plane. You can tell he's pretty upset. And it's funny because watching this scene, it reminded me, it would probably would have been a little bit funnier maybe if it was done um, in the manner of the story that I'm about to tell. So this gentleman I worked with, he was an older gentleman. He was the chief of police at the time, and he was telling me a story about working in a northern community, much like Ennis, when he was a younger police officer, and he was working with a gentleman whose wife was still living in the lower 48. gentleman had come up here to become a cop in Alaska, got a job at this remote northern department. And finally his wife was coming and he was so excited. He's like, yay, like my wife's finally coming, I can't wait for her to get here. And, he's already like bought them a house and stuff. And so the day comes and there's a terrible, like it's a bad snowstorm, not bad enough really to delay the plane, but bad enough that, you can, the weather's frightful, there's blowing snow. It's a lot of it. It's very cold. So, this officer goes to the airport, much in my imagination, I picture like the elder prior here. He's got like a teddy bear or maybe some chocolates in a heart shaped box or something, and he's standing there, and the plane opens, and everybody gets off the plane, and he looks. He's like, "Where's my wife?" And he looks, and she's still like, you can see her like looking out the window of the plane, and she just waves, and is like, "No, I'm not getting out. I'm going home." And the doors close, and she doesn't even get off the plane and goes back because she's like, "Screw this," because she saw the weather. So yeah, that scene kind of reminded me of that. It would have been funny maybe if she had just stuck her head out the plane and be like, "You got to be effing kidding me! I'm not living in this." Get bent and then gets back on the plane. But then we jump to Navarro and Danvers. They go to see the teacher. He tells them about the ice caves, which seems funny to me that they don't know about that kind of stuff. There- for this community to be the size it is, there's a lot of things that like people are like, I didn't know that. And living in a small community like this in Alaska, the one thing you learn is like there are no secrets. None. There's no secrets. Like everybody knows everything about everybody. And uh, one of my favorite anecdotes about that is when I was working on St. Paul Island, I get this email. The probation officer who oversees our area. So basically, somebody that gets charged with a felony crime and they get released. Maybe they get released early. They'll get released on probation, and they can get out of jail as long as they follow the rules of the probation. And they're assigned a probation officer who can come and give them drug tests and check up on them and search their house at any time. Basically, there's certain rights you give up to be on probation. You can say, yes, I will accept the terms of this probation and let the probation officer come to my house and search it for weapons, child porn, whatever, depending on what crime you're charged with, um, is what they can look for. But he can come in anytime he wants and look, and I will get to be free as long as I comply with these probation rules. So our probation officer calls or contacts us and says, "Hey, I want to come." There was like two, I think two, maybe three probationers in the city, and he goes, "I want to come for a couple of days and check up on your guys' probationers, check up on my guys there. Can you guys come pick me up at the airport and give me a ride around town and take me to their houses and et cetera, et cetera." Basically act as his guide and liaison. Yeah, sure, no problem, whatever. So he's like, "Don't tell anybody, keep it quiet. I don't want these guys to know. Like if I'm gonna drug test one of them or a couple of them, whatever it was, and I don't want them to get a heads up, and I don't want them to avoid me. So please, you know, don't tell anybody." So of course I didn't tell anybody. I didn't have anybody to tell. Well, the day comes, probation officer lands at the airport. I pick him up. We exchange pleasantries and pick him up, and I'm going to take him to the store so he can pick up some groceries because there's no restaurants or anything. There's no place to eat there really, so he's got to get some food for the 3 or 4 days that he's going to be there. So I take him to the store, the one store in town, the AC store. Take him to the store. We're walking around the store, and I'm kind of showing him where stuff is, and everything's like super expensive. And we're walking through the store, and one of the ladies that lives in the town looks at him and he goes, "Hi, Rex." which was his name, and it was it was so hilarious because dude was shook. I mean, just like, how do you know who the f I am? You know, like how do you know who I am? And because he's thinking like his trip here is this big secret, doesn't understand that everybody in town knows everybody. Everybody knows like who works at the airport. The people that work at the airport, they look at the plane manifests. They look at who's coming and going. If they see a name on there they don't recognize, they're probably Googling it, or they're asking people like, who is this guy? Who is this person? All you got to do is put his name into Google and it's going to come up. He works for the probations department. And so it really like messed with him. It really like flipped his switch. He was like, what in the hell? And I was like, dude, I'm sorry. I didn't tell anybody. But it's just the way it is here. Like everybody knows everything. Like there's no secrets here. He was like, I guess not. And of course, at least one of his probationers knew that he was coming, but everybody was behaving. Everybody did fine. But it was just shook the dude, like shook him to his core. Like he couldn't believe it because he was trying to be all secret and covert, and he didn't count that his probationer's like cousin or nephew or somebody worked at the airport and saw the manifest and was like, "Oh, hey, your probation officer's coming." Everybody knows who he is, so he's coming. But yeah, it was kind of surprising to me how there's so many things that these officers, that they don't know. Like they didn't know about the ice caves. It's like, who doesn't know about the freaking ice? Like you got at one point that's got to be the talk of the town. Like, hey, they found ice caves over here with whale bones in them or whatever. So you think at some point they would hear about it, even if it was like anecdotally or peripherally. So I found that a little weird, a little hard to swallow as far as rural Alaska life goes. Sometimes, especially in the wintertime, there's not a lot going on in these villages. So any news is big news. Forgive me. I've been trying to cut down drinking on mic, but because of my voice, I guess I gotta keep my pipes lubricated here. So Navarro goes to see her friend Rose. We don't really, we get a little bit more backstory on her. I guess she was a professor or something and got fed up with it and left. Still not a whole lot of information on her. Danvers gets a call to go to the mine. Her daughter got caught defacing property, writing like murderers on in spray paint, and it was kind of funny because she's like, "Oh, you don't want to," talking to the mine lady, like, "You don't want to ruin her life. Come on." And I was thinking, like, yeah, maybe we're at a point now where maybe she does need to get some charges or some corrective action. There needs to be some consequences for her action. Something that I didn't notice, or I probably wouldn't have noticed unless my brother-in-law hadn't pointed out. At that scene where she goes to the mine, there's like two Teslas like parked next to the doors that she defaces, like brand new Teslas, not a scratch of snow on them. I think they're white, they're clean. And I was like, well, that's bullshit. Like, I don't think there's any electric vehicles that far north. There's at least one Tesla, I think, here in town. Uh, I don't I don't know who owns it, but I see it occasionally. But from what I've heard, electric vehicles don't do well in a colder climate. I watched a show where Ewan McGregor and Charlie, I think it's Borman is his name, rode some electric motorcycles from like the tip of South America, like up to California. And those bikes, the Harley Live Wires, like performed very poorly in cold climates. Basically, when they were like in the mountains of like Argentina and stuff, like the bikes were just not holding a charge. Their range got cut in like half. Um, really turned me off. Not that I was ever a big fan of electric vehicles or wanting one, but really turned me off from wanting to own one in Alaska. Um, I think they're probably, if you live in like a warmer climate like California or Florida, maybe it's great. I would probably consider owning one there, but not so much here. I don't want my life to be in the hands of a battery. um, especially one that doesn't necessarily perform well in cold climates. That's something that is really unique about Alaska that people don't really you don't really hear a lot about it. Like people talk about how dangerous it is here and stuff like that, and it's true, but it's not really. They didn't even like. I feel like they didn't really talk about it that much in this season of True Detective. Like you can get locked out of your house and die. Like you can freeze to death if you get locked out of your house and can't get back in certain conditions and certain weather. So not a fan of the electric vehicles yet until they winterize them. So while that's going on, Navarro's sister leaves this mental health facility that she's been placed in, and apparently walks on the ice and kills herself. Um, I thought that was a little weird. Apparently, this facility she was in, it wasn't a what's the in man, can tell I'm tired because I can't think. It was not an in custody facility. It was a volunteer facility, but still, even then, you would think they would log your comings and goings. All the facilities that I've ever dealt with like that, like you had to sign in and sign out. You couldn't just like, well, get up and walk out. But maybe she did. I mean, maybe that's how they knew she was gone. Um, because apparently the Coast Guard, this was again like one of the most unbelievable things, is the Coast Guard finds and identifies her body within like hours, if not minutes. Um, that was pretty ridiculous. There's no how was the Coast Guard just happened to be there? Um, as far as I know, the Coast Guard doesn't do like a whole lot of like random like searches like that. Just look, oh, we just happen to be out looking for people, and oh, look, we found one. And plus, the troopers are responsible for search and rescues in Alaska. And if anything, the troopers would have called the Coast Guard to go look for her. Like that's how that would have worked. It would have gone from probably probably the Ennis police to the troopers to the Coast Guard. It would have went through like three um, agencies before the search actually got like called. So Danvers um, is drinking and driving, which I thought was odd. See, they keep alluding that something happened in the past to her husband and son or stepson, that they were killed in a car accident, and they, I guess jumping ahead, I'll go ahead and ruin it now. Like they never flesh that out. They never explain it, and I guess there was some speculation that Danvers was driving drunk and killed them. But then it seems like also later on she doesn't know the specifics of what happened, so maybe she wasn't even there. So it's a little confusing. And she was so hard on that lady in the first episode that was drinking and driving. But then here we go, like later on, she does it to go see the captain or whatever. And it just seemed weird to me. It's like, okay, well, so does she hate drinking and driving or not? Like she's doing it, is she just being hypocritical? Was she involved in, the death of her son and husband or whatever? It's all over the place. There's a lot of there's a lot of ambiguous information given and never fleshed out. It's just kind of like it's almost like a choose your own adventure, which I didn't think was a great idea as far as this goes, because there's a lot of information about our characters I think that would help us form attachments to them that they never give us. So it's just like, okay, was she drinking and driving? Was she not? I don't think she was during the accident. I mean, but she obviously has no qualms about doing it now. I don't know. It was weird, and it was kind of it was just out of place. I felt. Um, Navarro finds out about her sister and just like goes nuts and fucking like goes and like gets into a fight with this guy from I think episode 1 that was beating up his girlfriend. of course, him and his friends, there's like four of them, and they beat the shit out of her. Again, like that would have been it for Navarro. Probably she would have got fired. Well, she would have got suspended, and then pending investigation, she would have got fired because she just started a fight out of nowhere. And like the most unbelievable thing of the entire series, uh, ghosts and spooks and the 24-hour lab results aside, is that she would do that and none of those dudes would complain. Like none of those dudes would like call the troopers and be like, guess what this bitch did? Because that is what people love to do more than anything, is like when a cop does something wrong, they want to tell somebody about it. So that was like just super out of place. And it is the series goes along, it's starting to get worse, like more unbelievable for me, more just like, oh, come on. And Danvers and Navarro basically get a tip that some fishermen, which is by now, I think it's like Christmas Day, it's like the 25th, and he's like, oh, some fishermen saw something out by the dredge. And there's a picture of a dude walking in the pink parka from earlier. And so Navarro and Danvers go out there to look for this, thinking it's Clark, the missing scientist. And they find Heiss, who's the guy we learned about earlier that had the similar injuries for the scientist. Apparently, he's living in this like big like mine dredge thing, and he's a junkie. There's like needles and stuff all over the place. And while Danvers is like chasing him down, Navarro has like another hallucination, but this time she has like blood coming out of her ear. So I'm thinking, well, it's maybe a concussion from the fight she was just in with like the 4 or 5 guys. So, is it mental illness? Is it concussion? Like, what is it? And the story kind of ends there with them finding Heiss and getting him to a hospital. He doesn't really, he's, again, instead of explaining things like in a normal, understandable way, he's just like, Clark went to the ground. He went to the night country. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? Because people don't really talk like that in real life. And so then the next episode starts. It jumps forward a few days. We're at December 31st now. So Navarro goes and gets her sister from the crematorium. They go to the hospital and meet Hess. He talks about the cave in, the blizzard, and shows on the map where there's an entrance to the cave. Younger Pryor gets kicked out by his wife because, how dare he work hard on this, like, possible multiple homicide that's happened in this town. Like, where does this guy get off, like, trying to work all this overtime and get money and provide for his family? Fuck that. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. So this cracked me up. So there's protests at the mine, and these 2 trucks full of riot troopers like show up, and basically there's like this big protest, and the troopers are like hitting people, and the mine people like open the gate to let them in, and then they start hitting them. It made no sense. Like, I didn't understand it. Um, like, one minute Navarro is like hanging out with Danvers at the hospital, and the next minute she's in the back of one of the like troop carriers wearing riot gear. And it's like, how much time passed here? Like, did she just like get a call out at the hospital that she needs to go report for like riot control? Like, what the fuck? Danvers or Navarro ends up like rescuing Leia, Danvers' kid, from another trooper, and like punching the other trooper. And again, Navarro would have been like gone, like long gone, suspended, uh, as well as the other trooper probably. Like, they would have been like, okay, we're going to take you guys off the streets for a while we figure out what's going on. But not in night country. We're just gonna stick Navarro back on the streets, even though she's recently had an altercation with like 4 dudes, and now she's like hitting other cops. But we're just gonna stick her stick her back on the street there. I thought it was kind of funny though. They tell Danvers, the mine lady calls Danvers and is like, "Hey, I want you to come and have a meeting," and she thinks it's about the protests, and she's like, "Well, that's the fucking troopers' fault. That's not, that didn't have anything to do with us. That's their jurisdiction." And I was like, "That is fucking spot on right there. Like that's that's true. That's true detective right there." Because that's exactly what would be going through a real cop's mind when something like that. Well, that's not even my shit show. Why do I have to deal with that? So Danvers goes to the meeting thinking she's gonna like reverse Uno the mine lady with some information about the mine funding the Salal station. And instead, like they pull like a reverse Uno card on her, and the captain tells Danvers that the case is closed because it was a weather event, and that killed the scientist. And that made me think of like that really made me think of like the Dyatlov Pass incident, where all these different theories are coming around and they're all basically weather related, or it was an avalanche, it was a windstorm, it was it was like a secret like wind avalanche or some whatever that last theory was. So I feel like the writers were like drawing on some of that maybe for inspiration with some of this, and that kind of pisses Danvers off because she's like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. And she basically, it's told, the case is closed, don't worry about it. And the captain alludes that he knows that Danvers and Navarro killed this Wheeler guy, who was the guy from like, again, almost no time spent on this whatsoever, other than like a brief flashback, and then it's mentioned a few times where they go to the house. The guy had killed his significant other, and then apparently they said it was a murder suicide, but then Navarro shoots the guy in the head. Again, so stupid. Like, can we have a positive portrayal of law enforcement for once, maybe, please? And like all cops cover stuff up, but it's just okay. This guy was a wife beater, so it's okay. No, it's not. Prior Hank meets with the mine lady. Obviously, there's some like strange bedfellow stuff going on there. Apparently, they had hired him to do something for them in the past and maybe promised him that. And this, I actually had got some vibes of this earlier. I think in that first episode, remember I was talking like how I felt maybe like Hank Pryor resented Danvers because maybe he wanted to be chief or something. Turns out I was right about that. Apparently, they had maybe teased him or promised him the chief of police job, and then weren't able to deliver because Danvers had gotten placed there instead. And there's I'm not going to say it's like super accurate, but there's a little bit of truth to stuff like that where it seems to be there's a couple of different kind of cops out there. There's the cops that want to do their job and help people and just do the best they can, and there's cops out there that just seem like, I just want to amass as much power and prestige as I can. Like I don't I want to be the biggest fish in this pond, even though there's only like two other fish in the pond. It doesn't make any sense to me how people just get power hungry and career motivated and just like, I want to be, the illustrious potentate of this police department, and I will screw over everyone that works below with me or below me to get it. Um, but apparently, I think maybe Pryor's getting catfished or stood up might have had a lot to do with this. I think probably if his bride or whatever she was had showed up, I think probably this wouldn't have happened. He would have probably been busy with her, and would have been like, I'm not, I got a new life now. I'm not gonna like mess with this. But apparently, they ask him very surreptitiously to kill this heist guy so that he can't show them the cave, even though he'd already showed them one cave entrance and it was blocked off. And they find out basically like, okay, there's another way to get into this cave. Navarro finds out that these spiral things that we've been seeing is a warning to stay away from the ice caves, which now it makes me like, why did that lady have a tattoo of like a, I don't know, like, stay away from me, I'm dangerous. Maybe that's what it was. And what did that have to do with the cult from the first season? Like, why did they have that symbol there? But Navarro lets Danvers' stepdaughter out of jail. She goes with Rose to the ocean and like spreads her sister's ashes in this like hole. She chips a hole in the ice and puts her sister in there, her ashes. And this was Danvers goes and visits. There's a conversation about the water being poisoned and bad, and her daughter like tells her like, "Did you know there was like 9 stillbirths?" And her Danvers goes to the um, graveyard where they have all the recently deceased because they can't bury anyone because of the weather, and starts looking at some of the like stillborn caskets. And I thought that was going to go somewhere. I thought she was going to be like, I'm going to figure this out, what killed these kids, why these kids were stillborn, and then like go after the mine. But it doesn't really go anywhere. Um, she goes and gets heroin out of the again. Like, Jesus Christ, why can't we have like normal, honest police officers? She goes and steals evidence out of the evidence room to give to this heist guy because he refuses to show him how to get in the cave again without heroin because he's a junkie. And so she goes and commits, like the it's almost like the level of crimes that they've committed are not equal to the crimes that they're solving. Like, they've done worse shit than they're trying to figure out here. Um, so young Pryor comes in, basically says, "Hey, I think there's something off about this Wheeler case. I think you guys are lying." And she basically is like, "Well, why are you asking questions that you don't want to know the answers to?" And just kind of fucking shines him on. Apparently, she goes and checks this heist guy out of the same facility that Navarro's sister was in. So he couldn't get out, but the sister could. Um, Hank Pryor, I guess, has been following her, sees her get the dude, and goes to her house. And there's kind of a confrontation there where like Hank Pryor almost doesn't even like try and like pretend. He's almost not like it's almost not like he's like, oh, I mean, he does like for a second, he's like, oh, they want me to pick him up on a warrant or something, like, you don't have to worry about this, you're the chief. And then finally he's just like, oh fuck it, I'm gonna shoot him. And like shoots the dude. Like, this was like a lot of like boom at the end of the episode, like a lot of action. Hank shoots the heist guy dead, and then young Pryor, who has moved into like the shed out back at Danvers' house, hears the shots, I assume, walks in, sees what his dad's done. The dad points his gun at Danvers, and young Pryor shoots his dad. And that was kind of a surprise. I was like, holy shit, like, everybody's shooting everybody. And Navarro, and this again, Navarro shows up, sees these dead bodies on the floor, and is like, we have to cover this up. So apparently they're like, first instinct to anything is just like, we got to cover it up. Like, we can't, because they say something about like, oh, they'll never believe um, Pryor, or he'll get in trouble or whatever. I'm like, no, he won't. Like, this was obviously, I don't know. It made no sense to me as to why they needed to cover it up, other than to create exigency for them to like get to this cave. Which, by the way, Heist told Danvers where the cave entrance was before she gave him the heroin, um, which was super like convenient, because if she hadn't, then they would have just been shot of luck because he just died. So young Pryor is like, I'll clean it up, I'll do it, and you guys go, like, to find the cave, because obviously, this murder that happened like 3 or 4 years ago, they've got to solve it right now. Screw these 2 murders that just happened right now in my living room or my kitchen. We've got to go solve this like cold case. So they run off into the night, storm on the horizon, to the ice cave, which is where episode 6 picks up. This is the final episode. Uh, they show up at the ice cave. They're walking. They figure out how to get it, which the entrance that they like dug to the ice cave or like picked with their pickaxe. There's like no snow on the ground. It looked like it was just ice. They get down into the cave. There's snow in the cave for some reason, even though they just like dug a hole in it. They don't have any cleats on. Um, they fall through the floor. They find Clark, and there's like an underground lab down there. And I actually called this an episode or two ago. I told my wife, I was like, I think these caves connect to the station. And then, like, for no more than they walked, because I mean, granted, they did fall at one point, but still, no further than they walked. Like that entrance where they went into the cave, like I would think they would be able to go, huh? The ice station's like right there, like just over this hill. Like maybe this has something to do with the station. Like if somebody showed me on a map and they're like, look, there's a cave like right next to your house. Now, I might not jump to well, maybe there's a secret entrance to the cave in that house, but I might think maybe that cave runs under the house or something. So that seemed a little like it didn't seem like they walked far at all, like not even like 100 yards or 200 yards till they like fell through the ice and then they're like in this like secret underground lab. They get back into the station, which I mean, they spent almost no time in the caves. Like, boom, they're in the cave. Boom, they're back in the station, back where it all began, which I kind of figured that's where it was going to go. I was like, eventually it's going to end up back in the station. The Clark, the missing scientist guy, he's juking him, he's running around and he locks Danvers in this like refrigerated like case thing that has a glass door for some reason, not an insulated door. And he hits Navarro with a fire extinguisher. And I couldn't, again, this is one of those things where I'm just like, what the fuck? Danvers, who has her gun out, puts the gun up, grabs like this metal pole stick thing, and starts hitting the glass. And I'm like, you have a gun. Shoot the glass in the corner and then hit it with the stick. Like, I don't know. It made no sense. Like, why? It was ridiculous. So, and it was funny because the Clark guy's like dragging Navarro off and she's like waking up. And I was like, she's going to beat his ass. And that's exactly what happens. Like Danvers runs around the corner and Navarro's on top of him, just beating the shit out of him. Then they tape him to a chair and put headphones on him and basically make him listen to the Annie video where she's like screaming like on just over and over. And while I thought it was like, well, I thought it was kind of clever, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Again, it's like you can't put someone under duress like that and then like have what they tell you count. But I told my wife as soon as they taped it to the chair, I'm like, we're about to get a lot of exposition here. Like he's going to explain a bunch of shit. So they like leave him for a little bit, and then they come back and they start interrogating him. And it turns out, they lead you to believe all this time that the mine is producing pollution, and the station, Salal Research Station, is basically covering it up, saying like, "Oh no, there's no pollution going on here. It's fine." And I thought this was kind of a clever twist. It wasn't like an M Night twist, but it was interesting. It wasn't something I expected. Clark's like, no, we at the station asked the mine to produce more pollution because it melts the ice faster and we can get to this microorganism that we're trying to harvest quicker. So we actually need the mine to produce more pollution. Didn't see that coming, I gotta admit. So this is where we get all our exposition, or most of our exposition. He talks about how Annie had discovered the tunnel, got and somehow I don't know how like Annie figured out what all was going on. Apparently, she discovered some notes or something that basically said like we need to ask the mine to make more pollution or something. Like it was so weird how she discovers this underground mine or lab and all of a sudden just understands everything that's going on. She destroys a bunch of equipment, and then the other scientists discover her down there, like causing disturbance and breaking the stuff, and they all fly. So all like six scientists fly into a rage, or no, I guess there is seven. Fly into a rage and like attack her. So they all the white people killed Annie. So all the white men in the series are responsible for the one murder of Annie. So again, they're talking to Clark, and he references the time as a flat circle line, which was a lot cooler when Matthew McConaughey said it. But when he said it, it was kind of like, yeah, that's the line from the earlier season, but it doesn't. Nobody cares anymore. Uh, Something kind of so Danvers like keeps going and taking a nap in, in the ice station, and then when she wakes up, bad shit happens. Like she wakes up and Clark is in the like walks out in the snow and dies. Apparently, Navarro let him die. Um, Young Pryor goes with the bodies of his father and I think maybe the other gentleman to the Rose Lady, and she's just like calmly as can be, like, "Oh yeah, let's I'll show you how to like bury these bodies in the ice so nobody will ever find them." And that was a little weird to me. I'm like, "Who is this lady? Like, is she all of a sudden she's just like, oh yeah, I cook, I clean, I hunt, and I help with body disposal." This is like a sign in her yard. It says like body disposal, like in her front yard. So that was a little weird that, we find out like, oh, I was a professor and, occasionally I like dispose of bodies, and made me wonder maybe if she had killed um, Travis, the guy that pointed her in the direction of the scientists' bodies earlier, if maybe she had murdered him, even though she said that he committed suicide. So I don't know. Who knows? Again, there's a lot of ambiguous, like implied things that never get fleshed out. And basically, it's kind of like choose your own adventure. It's like, oh, well, if you want it to be this way, it's that way. Uh, so Danvers like falls through the ice, looking for Navarro, who like goes off on her own. Navarro has like another vision. Again, we're not sure if these are actual like spirit visitations or hallucinations or now caused by her concussion from getting the shit beat out of her. Danvers falls through the ice. Navarro ends up saving her. Uh, they have some like flashbacks and stuff, but again, it's established that Navarro killed Wheeler. I was telling my wife, I was like, maybe before everything was revealed, I was like, maybe they're not going to be like dirty cops. Maybe it was like there was a child in the home that shot the Wheeler guy, and then they like covered that up because they're like, we can't like put this kid through that. So let's just say he killed himself and go with it from there. I felt that would have been a better way to go, and it also would have made me care about the protagonist a little bit more, because in screenwriting you have to have like it's called a save the cat moment. Okay, where basically when and it's usually done really early. In this case, it would have been revealed like on the last episode, but really, when you introduce a character, you want, if they're the protagonist and you want people to care about them, you have to show them doing something um, heroic or good, like saving a cat. Like, oh, okay, there's a cat stuck in a tree. Let me get this cat down. And then, okay, well, this guy saved a cat. He must be a good person. He must be a good protagonist. So I care about him. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. Let's follow him on his journey and see where his story goes. And I didn't feel like there was ever a save the cat moment for any of our protagonists. There was never a moment where I looked at Danvers or Navarro and was kind of like, oh, like I hope nothing bad happens to him. Because honestly, I was like, these are not good people. Um, and we never really got like Danvers's like extreme reaction to her stepdaughter trying to explore her native culture. Like Danvers was straight up like abusive to this girl. And and I thought, well, maybe they'll go back and explain why she feels that way. And they never did. So again, okay, well, she's just a shitty human being. She drinks and drives. She's horrible to her kid, and she's horrible to her fellow employees, like Pryor, like not letting him freaking have Christmas off and all kinds of shit. So it was pretty bad as far as like character development goes. Definitely no save the cat moments for Navarro or Danvers. Although finally at the end, I did feel a little bit better about them, but I was still like, these aren't good protagonists. Um, so they have a fire built. I'm assuming they're kind of like the garage portion of the station, and they've got this fire built indoors. I might add, um, and there's no smoke. It looks like it's a gas fire or something. I'm like, where's that smoke going from that fire? But there's no smoke. It's the most amazing fire I've ever seen. And then later on, when the storm stops and they get out of the station, they're driving around in a station vehicle. Like apparently they had like trucks and vans and stuff there. So this whole time they're like in this starting a fire in this building when they literally could have just got in one of the vans or the trucks and turned it on and had heat. And people are like, well, what about the fumes? What about CO? I was like, what about the smoke from the fire? Same problem. If they're in a garage, they could open the door a little bit to let the fumes out. But still, I digress. Just terrible writing. um, so they go and they're looking somehow or another. They get inspired to look at the hatch. Oh, because Clark had told him he was like holding the hatch because somebody was trying to get in. Again, he when his explanation of things comes out, it doesn't make any sense. He's just like, it was her. It was Annie. She was awake and she came after us to have her revenge or whatever. Very ambiguous, very like not very descriptive. He just did say, he was holding on to the hatch so that it couldn't get in or whatever. So they look at the handprints on the hatch and they see that one's missing some fingers. And then we get a flashback to the character from the first episode who was like there with the girl that got beat up, or maybe she was the girl that got beat up. I don't remember. Um, and Navarro's like, oh, it's her. And so they figure it out like that it was this girl with the missing fingers. So the storm stops. They get in this truck that they could have been using the entire time to keep warm. And they go to see like the cleaning lady and her friend. And this is where we learn basically what happened. So apparently, somehow, these cleaning women figured out that all the men at the station killed it. And this is where I really had a problem with it because so all these women get together and decide to go get revenge for Annie, and they storm the station like fucking SEAL Team 6, apparently leaving no evidence whatsoever. Herd the men out, minus Clark, who hid in the hatch, herd them out to a box truck, take them out to the ice, and make them take off their clothes and send them off to their fate where they all perish. And while they're telling this story, I'm like, so they figured out that they find out about the hidden hatch, and then they find the like there's a tool down there that they figure out was like, oh, okay, this was used to stab Annie. And you see them like, there's a cleaning lady like at the police department reading the police report, and somehow or another they put it all together. But my problem with this is how do they know all the men were involved? Because they got everyone. How did they not know it wasn't just one of them? How did they know it wasn't just like one or two? Like they killed all those men. Um, like how did they know? That's my problem with like vigilante justice, because it's like, okay, well, how did you know that all those men were like, the police didn't know? So I know you didn't know, figured out from reading the police reports. Like nobody knew except for the dudes. And if they had explained maybe a way that they knew that all of them did it, I'd have been a little bit more accepting of it. But I'm just like, that's an awfully big fucking chance to take there. Like I'm just going to kill all these men because, I mean, surely one of them did it, right? We'll get him. He's in there. Again, very shitty. And how did they know that Annie was killed in the cave? Because they didn't have the video. I don't know. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. And then at the end, they ask the leader of the SEAL Team 6 there, the native SEAL Team 6, why they left the tongue behind. And she's like, what tongue? We didn't leave no tongue behind. So I think that was meant to leave some like ambiguity, like, oh, maybe there was some supernatural stuff going on. But by that point, I was just like, this is the stupidest shit I've ever heard. Like, I don't care. I don't even care anymore. Like, I don't even think the writer knows how the tongue got there. I think they just thought it would be some cool shit, some spooky shit to write right, and then we'll figure it out later. And then at the end, they're just like, oh, we'll leave it ambiguous. And then at the ending, so it kind of jumps ahead a little bit to Danvers being interviewed, much like Matthew McConaughey's character in True Detective. And they basically ask her, like, well, what happened to Navarro? She disappeared. Nobody, there's been sightings of her, but nobody knows. And Navarro's like, I don't know. She's not on the ice. I can tell you that. And then there's like a shot of her walking out into the mountains. So I'm like, well, what did she do? Did she go live off the land? Did she like did she go native? Is she living like in the mountains? Did she commit suicide like her sister? It was very ambiguous. Like, what happened to her? And I didn't like it. I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the explanation for everything. The writing I felt was terribly slow. I felt like it was a great premise, a great idea. A lot of hard work went into the show. I could tell, the props. They tried to make it look like Alaska. They tried, their best. I think the writing, I think, was probably the weakest part of the show. And honestly, that's kind of almost the most important, aside from maybe some of the acting. Uh, I thought the characters did the best they could with what they had, but again, I didn't care about any of them really. Probably young Pryor was the only one that I kind of felt sorry for, and that's just because his wife kicked him out, and he's just trying to do his job, and trying to provide for his family. And she's like, "I don't like this. You get out." Jeez. And there's something else that somebody pointed out, because she gets woken up at one point and she's like, oh, I have a final or something. I have a test here in a couple of hours. I'm just going to stay up. And somebody was like, no nursing school in the country is in session the week of Christmas. Like they all get out like the week before. Like even online classes, like there's a Christmas break. There's like a 2-week like Christmas exodus. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like she wouldn't have any classes. Like she would be on Christmas break by then probably. But again, just poor writing. A lot of inconsistencies, and there's some things where you can kind of suspend your disbelief or suspend your disappointment and be like, oh, well, okay, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. But then, with all that promise and like just how super fucking weird it was for all those guys to be like frozen in the ice and all that, and then it just turns out it was like a bunch of angry aunties with guns in a box truck. Like, my disappointment was so bad. I was just when they started explaining it, I was looking at my wife like, "Can you believe this shit?" And she feels the same way I do. She thought it was fucking stupid. So it's not just me. I just felt it had a lot of promise and it failed to deliver. Um, by the way, when I just got back from vacation where I went down to Mexico for a little bit and watching TV in the hotel room, they were promoting the shit out of this show down there. And I guess the writer and director of the series is Latina, and she, was coming on and she was speaking in Spanish about the show and like telling people to watch it. They were really heavily promoting it down there. So I was seeing that and thinking like, oh, you know, can't wait to get back and finish the show up. And then I did, and I was like, oh my god! I tell you what, I'll never watch it again. I'll definitely watch the first season again, but I'm not going to watch this season again. I don't think I've ever been so disappointed by a television show. Like, there's been some TV shows where I'm like, oh, I would have done that differently, or that could have gone differently. But this is one I was just like, I can't believe I wasted 6 hours of my life on this. I don't know. I'm sure there's some people that love it. I did notice on IMDb, the last episode is like the lowest rated episode. It's got like a 5.5 or something. So I am not the only one that's disappointed with it. And I feel similarly to a lot of people that I see commenting on it who say that they feel like this wasn't a True Detective show. It was something else that got basically branded as True Detective. They're like, I will throw True Detective on there and slap it on there as season 4. And I feel like that's probably true. And I feel like there was some script stuff that didn't get fleshed out, or there's some scenes that got cut that didn't flesh out. Like, we never got the full story on Danvers's family on the car accident. So what happened with that? And we never found out who left the tongue. Like, that's ambiguous. Like, oh, I don't know. I guess it was a ghost. Or one of those native ladies was like holding on to that tongue for some reason. So then they said when they found the body, it was missing a tongue. So Hank Pryor Sr. moved the body. And then when Navarro found it, it was missing the tongue. So that means that the crematorium lady didn't take the tongue because it was already missing. So I don't know. I feel like they maybe wrote themselves into a corner and then just, I don't know. We'll explain it with ghosts. Yeah. And the ending was like super ambiguous. Like, okay, did Navarro kill herself? Did she just go live off the grid? Like, what's she doing? Is she really there? Because there's a scene where her and Danvers are like looking off this, like sitting on a deck, like looking off, and they're not acknowledging each other. So it's like, was she dead? Is she a spirit now or what? And I saw an interview with the actress that played Navarro, and she says she thinks that Navarro just basically like went somewhere where she didn't have to work, like she had no responsibilities and didn't have to worry about that stuff and could be herself. So it seems like she's more of in the like Navarro's still alive, which I would like to think. I would like to think that. Um, I would hate to think that character, a protagonist like that, would be like, well, I just got to kill myself. That's my mom killed myself, my sister killed herself. It's family tradition. I got to keep that going. It's the only way out. I feel like that's a bad message to send to your viewers. But anyway, let me talk for just a minute about the portrayal of law enforcement in movies and TV, and then I'll be done. So the problems I have a lot of times with the portrayal of law enforcement and in movies and TV, especially recently, it seems like it's always been in a kind of a negative light, or they're maybe pretty ambiguous, like, well, they could help, or this or that. And that's one of the things, like at the end, when I can't remember if it's Navarro or Danvers asks the lady, like, oh, well, what, why didn't you guys come to us with that? And they're like, oh, the police don't do nothing. And I don't know how many times I had people tell me that throughout my career, and I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I can't just do whatever the fuck I want, like on TV. I have to follow rules and laws. And it's like, if you think something is wrong or illegal and it's not, that's not my fault. That's the legislators' fault that passed these laws. Like, I don't have no say in what laws get passed and don't. And if you think that people shouldn't be allowed to ride uh, electric bikes on the street, or whatever the hell you're complaining about, like, that's, and you call me and I'm like, sorry, there's nothing I can do. It's not the police just going, oh, I don't feel like messing with that, I'm not going to mess with it. It's there's nothing I can do. Like, I can't go tell someone to do something if they're not breaking any laws. Like, I can't tell somebody to go, oh, hey, you know what? Even though you're wearing a reflective vest and a helmet, this lady down here really doesn't want you to ride your bike on the street. So I'm going to ask you to stop. And then they're going to tell me to go F myself. And I'm going to have to go F myself because I have absolutely no enforcement power whatsoever. Um, a lot of people's problem with the police, it stems from ignorance of the law and their rights, and just basically not knowing what the police can and can't do. It's like, oh, my neighbor's playing loud music at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's like, well, I can't. The disorderly conduct statute states it has to be a loud noise between like 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. It's not in those hours. There's not really anything I could go ask him to turn it down, but he can tell me to go F myself. So yeah, I think that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. Um, or the burden of proof. Like on murder cases and stuff. Especially you see that in small towns. Like, well, everybody knows who did it. I don't know why the police won't do anything. Well, it's probably a couple of reasons. One, there's absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever, and two, nobody's actually going and telling the police about it. They're just like, well, I don't know why they want to arrest him. Everybody knows he did it. Well, has anybody that maybe witnessed it, like, or heard him confess to it, maybe went and reported it? They just expect the police to, like, and that's another thing too. Like, it takes a community to police a community, and people expect the police to do it all. And it's like, the police only have as many eyes and ears as you give them. If you know about something, you need to call the police and tell it. You can't just expect the police to, like, osmosis that shit, you know, from the police department or whatever. It's like, okay, there's 40 some miles of road in this town. Plus, people are calling all the time and complaining about their neighbor's dog barking and shit like that. How much time do you think the police actually have to drive through your neighborhood in a given shift and do all their paperwork and do all that? It's just, night shift maybe a little bit more, but day shift is the devil when it comes to police work. It's horrible. I hated working day shift. But yeah, and people see movies and TV, and then that's kind of how they form their opinions. And it can give a negative light to, well, a lot of things, but law enforcement primarily, it seems recently, has been portrayed in a negative light. And it's funny because I always hear people like, oh, like, police killed this many people, or police shot this many people, and police did this, like, just killers with a badge, killers with a badge. It's like, if I really, really wanted to kill people and get away with it, you know what I do? I'd go become a fucking doctor. Because medical malpractice is freaking rampant. Like, I don't know anyone personally that has died. Well, that's not true. I do, but I don't know anyone. Let me see. I'm not friends or family with anyone who's ever been shot in a police shooting, but I've definitely had friends and family members die because of medical incompetence. We'll put it that way. And nothing ever happens to the doctors. Like, there's never any, like, Oh, maybe we should take this guy's license. It's like, oh, Bob lost another one. Darn it. Oh, well. So, anyway, I've bitched long enough. I'm going to get off here. Uh, Man, sorry about the way that show turned out. I wish it had been better. I was rooting for it. But again, I think probably it wasn't initially a True Detective series, and I think it probably would have been better as like a 2.5 hour movie. But this is what we got, and they made they made the creative choices that they did for reasons that are beyond my grasp. So anyway, hope you enjoyed my take on this. It was very disappointing at the end. They really hyped it up, it seemed, and then didn't deliver. Um, I do have eventually. I think I'm going to get around to writing a detective story set in Alaska. So maybe I will create what they were going for, and actually really good detective story with detective undertones. And that's another thing too. Like I don't think anybody that watched the show could have figured out what was happening. Like could have got to the end. And I hate that. I love a good mystery where you can like solve the mystery along with the protagonist. And this one was just like, oh, here's an exposition drop, like, oh, here's another exposition drop. Like we're gonna tell you what happened. They didn't really There was a couple of times where they figured stuff out. For the most part, I think Pryor figured most of it out, but there were a couple times where the protagonist like, oh, like the hair dye thing, like that was good detective work. But then again, it just goes to another exposition drop. There's no like putting things together. It's all like, well, let's go to this person, and then this person tells you the secret, and then this person tells you this secret, and there's just stuff that you have no way of being able to figure out. I felt A Haunting in Venice was really good about that. Like you could figure the story out or the mystery out along with the protagonist. And there's not a lot of mysteries out there like that. A lot of them lie by omission, or they purposely like omit information so that you have a hard time figuring it out. But not A Haunting in Venice. You should check that out for a good mystery story that you can solve along with the protagonist. But I can't recommend True Detective for that. Anyway, guys, that's it. This is the Last Watch. I'm Beans Baxter, and I will be here in Alaska. The Beans abides. So have a good one.